She keeps chairs warm, Dad joked. Then a black chopper landed on the street. Elite soldiers jumped out. General Carter, we have the nuclear football. The smell of grilled ribs and freshly cut grass should have made the day feel warm, familiar. Instead, I stood there in my pressed sundress, holding a lemonade like it was a security badge, completely invisible. This was my parents' 45th wedding anniversary. A big backyard barbecue celebration packed with relatives, old Navy friends, and neighbors who still called my dad Colonel even though he'd retired a decade ago. He thrived in this environment, retelling war stories for the 100th time while people gathered around like disciples at a campfire. My mom flitted between tables, refilling drinks, whispering names to guests she'd forgotten over the years. Me? I was the daughter with the computer job, the one who always missed birthdays because of some project. I watched as my cousin Brett showed off his combination medal from a recent training exercise. My uncle clapped him on the back so hard I could hear it from across the yard. Now that's a soldier. My uncle boomed. Boots on the ground. That's real service. People buzzed around them, eager to ask questions. No one ever asked what I did, and honestly, I'd stopped expecting them to. They had already built a version of me that was easy to digest. Emily works with computers. That was the phrase my dad always used. It explained everything and nothing. As if computers couldn't mean anything from fixing printers to decoding enemy satellites. It made me sound like I spent my days adjusting Wi-Fi routers at a help desk. I let it slide every time. Because in my world, the real world, silence isn't just a preference, it's survival. I am Emily Carter. To my family, I am a 38-year-old spinster who never quite made it. But to the Department of Defense, I am Brigadier General Carter, Commander of Joint Task Force Ares. I oversee the nation's offensive cyber capabilities. I earned my star 3 weeks ago. I was frocked, promoted in a classified ceremony inside the Situation Room. I didn't tell my family. Why would I? To them, rank is about shouting and shooting. To them, if you don't have mud on your boots, you aren't serving. I stood near the folding table by the drinks, pretending to listen to my aunt drone on about Florida real estate. My eyes kept drifting back to my father, laughing with his former squadmates, louder and prouder with every beer. I used to want him to look at me like that. Now I wasn't sure I wanted to be seen at all. My brother was grilling burgers, tossing them dramatically like he was auditioning for a cooking show. My nephews ran around with water guns, screaming with the kind of joy only sugar and summer can create. And through it all, I kept smiling. Not the kind that reaches your eyes, but the kind that helps you stay unnoticed. The camouflage of the competent woman. At some point, a neighbor asked if I'd moved back to town. I said, no, I still lived in D.C. She nodded like that made sense. Then she tilted her head and asked, still doing that thing with spreadsheets? I laughed politely. Something like that. It was easier than explaining that last week. Spreadsheets involved rerouting the guidance systems of a hostile drone swarm over the Pacific. In that crowd, I wasn't General Carter. I was just Emily, the girl who never brought a boyfriend home. The one who didn't understand real service. To them, uniform meant front lines. Valor meant volume, not silence behind a classified firewall. I glanced up as my dad raised his glass, already gearing up for one of his famous speeches. I knew how it would go. A toast to my mom, a joke or two about army life, and inevitably a subtle jab at the quiet daughter with the quiet job. I braced myself, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. As everyone gathered around him, their eyes shining with admiration and nostalgia, I stayed behind the crowd. Part of me wanted to disappear. Another part, the buried one, was calculating, not out of spite, out of instinct. You see, in my real world, being unseen is often the greatest strength you can have. But being underestimated, that is a strategic advantage. When my dad lifted his glass, the whole yard went quiet the way it always did. He had a presence that pulled people in. A colonel's presence. He started with my mom calling her the anchor of his life. She blushed and waved him off. Then he shifted to his favorite topic, the service. The stories rolled out smooth, familiar, and polished from decades of retelling. The time his battalion crossed a desert storm. The night he made a call that saved his platoon. His friends nodded with pride, adding small details from their own memories. I watched the way he grew taller in their admiration. It was a version of him I rarely saw at home, but one I knew by heart. Every so often, someone in the crowd glanced at me as if wondering whether I felt proud. I forced a half smile. It was easier than wondering if I would ever fit in the world he worshiped. He lowered his glass slightly and scanned the crowd. I felt the shift coming before he even opened his mouth. His stories always ended the same way, with a joke that turned the mood light, except the joke usually came at my expense. He grinned and my stomach tightened the way it always did before impact. He pointed his glass at me, casual, like he was choosing a target for a friendly tease. And this here is my daughter Emily, he announced. She's in D.C. working with computers doing something with files or spreadsheets or whatever it is. The crowd chuckled softly. Then he added the kicker. Not everyone is cut out for the hard stuff, you know. Some folks have to keep the chairs warm so the rest of us can get the real job done. Right, Em? The laughter rippled through the group. It wasn't malicious. Exactly. It was dismissive. It was the laughter of people who felt superior because they understood dirt and sweat. And they thought I only understood air conditioning. My mom stared at the grass. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Not loud or explosive, but sharp, like a blade sliding under the skin. I did not move. I did not shift my weight. Years of training had taught me how to hold still under pressure. My dad chuckled at his own joke, taking a sip of his beer. She knows I'm joking, he said, shrugging. She keeps the family grounded. Someone has to answer the phones, right? I kept my eyes on him, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. He didn't know that 12 hours ago I was on a secure video link with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs authorizing a counter-offensive against a state-sponsored botnet that was trying to shut down the National Air Traffic Control System. He didn't know that the support staff he mocked held the authority to mobilize assets in 3 hemispheres, but I couldn't say that. So I smiled. Someone has to organize the files, Dad, I said softly. He grinned, satisfied. He had put me in my box. The quiet box. The safe box. I took a sip of lemonade. I checked my watch. It was 1,600 hours. Most people think of the military as boots on the ground or jets in the sky. My battlefield looks different. It's a cold, windowless room, surrounded by rows of terminals and glowing screens that never sleep. I work in Joint Task Force Ares. We are the tip of the spear for Cyber Command. My job isn't to fix printers. My job is to find patterns inside chaos, to detect threats before they even take shape. We don't use bullets. We use code. We use zero-day exploits. We use information warfare. A few months ago, I caught a coordinated cyber probe disguised as a phishing campaign targeting naval infrastructure in Guam. On the surface, it looked like noise. But I saw the signature. I flagged it, ran deeper simulations, and uncovered the early stages of an electronic warfare play meant to blind our satellite network. We neutralized it before it could spread. The entire Pacific Fleet stayed online because of it. There was no headline, no medal ceremony on the White House lawn, just a quiet well done from the president and a new threat profile added to the playbook. That's how wins feel in my world. Quiet, precise, invisible. And that's the part my family never saw. To them, I was the quiet daughter who always had her laptop open but never shared what was on the screen. I didn't blame them. What I do isn't flashy. It's not something you post about or explain over barbecue ribs, but that didn't make it less real. In my real world, no one calls me Emily. They call me General. The people I work with don't ask where I'm from or who raised me. They don't care if I grew up with a colonel or a mechanic. What matters is that when I speak, I'm right. And I don't speak unless I know for certain. I've sat in blackout rooms at 2 in the morning with 4-star generals waiting on a single sentence from me. Just one phrase to decide whether we reroute a carrier or wake up a sleeper cell. There's no applause in those rooms. Just a nod, an energy shift. Then the mission changes course, and I disappear back into the dark. Nobody in that world cares that I'm a woman or that I don't shout. My currency is precision. My power is silence. At the family barbecue, I'm the quiet girl with a government job. In the war rooms, I'm the voice they wait for before they breathe. I used to want my family to know, to understand what I carry. But now I realize their recognition was never the reward. The mission was I was standing by the cooler refilling my ice when it happened. My phone buzzed in my purse. It wasn't a text vibration. It wasn't a call. It was a specific rhythmic pattern that I had programmed myself. 3 short pulses, 2 long, 3 short pattern delta. My stomach dropped. That pattern meant one thing: direct kinetic or cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure. I didn't reach for the phone immediately. I scanned the yard. My dad was starting another story. My mom was cutting the cake. Then the music stopped. The Bluetooth speaker on the patio cut out mid-song. A few seconds later, my cousin Brett frowned and tapped his phone. That's weird. My signal just died. No 5G. Mine too, my aunt said. Must be the tower. My dad pulled out his phone. Probably just an outage. Too many people streaming movies. It wasn't an outage. It was a kill switch. My secure phone buzzed again. Harder. I reached into my purse and pulled it out. It was a thick, hardened device that looked nothing like an iPhone. The screen was black except for a single red line of text. Code 0. Skyline compromised. Immediate extraction required. Authority. National Command. I stared at the screen. Skyline. That was the code name for the Eastern Seaboard power grid. Someone had hit the grid hard. I looked up. The streetlights down the block flickered and went dark. Hey, my brother said, looking at the house. The kitchen lights just went out. A murmur of confusion rippled through the party. Circuit breaker, Dad suggested. I'll go check. He took a step toward the house. Then we heard it. It started as a low thrum in the distance, like a heartbeat speeding up. Then it became a chop. Fast, aggressive, mechanical, tup. It was getting louder and closer. "Is that a news chopper?" my uncle asked, shielding his eyes against the sun. "Too low?" my dad said, his old instincts kicking in. He frowned. "That sounds military." The sound grew to a roar. The trees in the front yard began to whip violently, leaves stripping from the branches. The umbrella on the patio table ripped loose, tumbling across the lawn. People screamed and covered their heads. "What is happening?" my mom cried. I didn't scream. I didn't cover my head. I calmly set my lemonade on the table. I picked up my purse. The shadow swept over the house. Hovering just above the roofline, descending rapidly toward the street in front of our house, was a black helicopter. But it wasn't a rescue chopper. It was an MH-6 Little Bird. Small, agile, and bristling with antennas. On the side benches, soldiers sat with their legs dangling out, rifles held across their chests. It flared hard, the nose pitching up and set down right in the middle of the cul-de-sac. The rotor wash kicked up a storm of dust and loose gravel from the road. "Everyone inside!" Dad yelled, waving his arms. "Get away from the windows." He looked at me. I was walking toward the gate. "Emily, what are you doing? Get back here." I ignored him. I unlatched the gate and walked out onto the driveway. 3 men jumped off the Bird before the skids even touched the asphalt. They weren't wearing standard fadings. They were wearing Crye Precision combat gear, high-cut helmets, quad nods, no unit patches. These were Tier 1 operators, the Ghosts. They sprinted up the driveway, weapons held at the low ready, scanning the perimeter. My family froze on the porch. My cousin Brett, the hero with the medals, looked like he was about to faint. My dad stood there, mouth open, unable to process what he was seeing. The lead operator bypassed everyone. He didn't look at my dad. He didn't look at my terrified mother. He walked straight through the chaos, straight to me. He stopped 3 feet away. He snapped his heels together. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the yard as the rotors idled. He rendered a sharp, perfect salute. "General Carter," he shouted over the noise. My dad's head snapped toward me so fast I thought his neck would break. "General," I returned the salute. Calm, precise, the muscle memory of command. "Report, Major," I said. "Ma'am," the operator yelled. "Skyline has fallen. The grid is down from Boston to D.C. The chairman has initiated continuity of government protocols." He handed me a secure tablet. "We have the nuclear football on standby, General. We need your biometric key to unlock the counterstrike package. You are the only authority active." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nuclear football. Counterstrike. Authority. My mother gasped. My brother dropped his spatula. I took the tablet. I scanned my thumb. The screen turned green. "Is the Bird secure?" I asked. "Yes, General. We have a direct line to the White House on board. We are wheels up in 60 seconds. I nodded. I turned to my father. He was standing there pale as a ghost. He looked at the helicopter. He looked at the elite soldiers waiting for my command. And he looked at me. He realized in that second that everything he thought he knew was wrong. The paper pusher, the IT girl, the daughter he joked about to his friends. I wasn't supported. I was the weapon. I walked up to him. "Dad," I said. My voice wasn't soft anymore. It wasn't the voice of the daughter who did the dishes. It was the voice that commanded joint task forces. He stared at me, trembling. "General," he whispered. "You're a general." "Brigadier General," I corrected. "Promoted last month." "It's classified." I looked at the beer in his hand. He was gripping it so hard his knuckles were white. "You might want to put that down, Colonel," I said, my voice cool and even. "You're addressing a superior officer." It was petty, it was arrogant, and it was the most satisfying moment of my life. Instinctively, drilled into him by 30 years of service, the old discipline took over. He dropped the beer glass into the grass. It didn't break. It just thudded. He straightened his spine. He sucked in his gut. He stood at attention. Slowly, shakily, he raised his hand. He saluted me. A retired colonel saluting his daughter. I held his gaze for a second. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let the moment land. "At ease, Colonel," I said. I turned back to the major. "Let's go." "Yes, General." The operators formed a protective diamond around me as we moved toward the helicopter. I climbed onto the skid of the Little Bird. The pilot handed me a headset. I put it on, drowning out the world. I looked back one last time. The party was silent. The barbecue was forgotten. My family was staring at me like I was a stranger. A terrifying, powerful stranger who had been hiding in plain sight. I keyed the mic. "Asset secured," I said. "Get us to the Pentagon. We have a war to fight." The helicopter lifted off, banking hard over the suburbs, disappearing into the smoke and the noise. I left the backyard behind. I left the judgment behind. I had a grid to save. And this time, they knew exactly who was saving it. 3 days later, the crisis was over. The grid was back up. The attack had been traced, neutralized, and countered. I was back in my office at the Pentagon. It had been 72 hours since I slept. I opened my email. There was a message from a civilian address. No subject. I would like to understand what it is you do. It was from my father. I stared at it for a long time. Not out of emotion, but out of curiosity. The message wasn't long. No apology. No attempt at small talk. Just that one sentence. It didn't sound like a father reaching out. It sounded like a retired officer requesting a briefing. I read it twice. I knew what he meant. I could hear the weight in those words, not of regret, but of realization. The kind that only comes after a system crash, after the old version of the world stops working. There was a time when that sentence would have meant everything to me. A chance to be seen, to be known. But I didn't need it anymore. That need had dissolved somewhere between the little bird lifting off and the moment I realized peace wasn't a gift he could give me. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because nothing needed to be said. He wasn't asking for a relationship. He was asking for access, and I had learned that access to me was something earned, not assumed. I hovered my cursor over the email. Then I clicked archive. Not deleted, just put it away. Like a medal in a drawer, a record of something that finally arrived too late to matter. I turned back to my screens. The map was glowing green. The world was safe. And for the first time, I didn't mind the silence because I knew exactly how loud my actions really